When Saints training camp opens, a lot of eyes are going to be on second-year players like Taliese Fuaga, Spencer Rattler, Kool-Aid McKinstry, and rightfully so. All three will play massive roles in any success we can possibly have in the 2025 season. But I think there's three second-year players that are kind of under the radar, and they might be worth keeping an eye on in training camp. I'm Tim. Let's talk Saints. Now, before we talk about three players, want to clarify what I'm looking at here. And I'm gonna have to steal something from the old T Bob and Jacob Hester morning sports show. Dudes versus Jimmy and Joe's. So dudes, okay, they're the dudes. They're the guys you're relying on. And in this example, Fuaga, Rattler, McKinstry would be the examples of second year dudes we need to have on. The reality of the NFL is you're not going to get 53 dudes on the field. You're not going to get 53 guys that you expect and should play at a high level and do the things they need to do to help you win. And what you're saying when you draft guys like that in the first, second round, like they were, Rattler may be a bit of an exception, but right now he's the starter, so you have to put him in this category. You're expecting an awful high ceiling. You're expecting potentially all pro type ability coming from those guys, and that's fine. And we hope we get it. But the reality is, it's the Jimmy and Joes. And in their example, the Jimmy and Joes were the look, you look at whatever the minimum NFL level needed for a player is, and they're always going to be above that. They may never reach the height of all pro or be one of the best at their positions. They can, but what you're basically betting on, what you're saying is they're the pros pro. They're the blue collar guys. They're the ones that going to show up. They're going to win starting jobs. They're going to be key depth pieces. They're going to be special teamers. They may be specialists that come on the field on either side of the ball, only get 12, 15 snaps. But the reason why they're doing that is they're supposed to make an impact when they're there. That's your Jimmy and Joes. And you need the Jimmy and Joes from these second year guys because that's kind of the foundation that you're going to have to put this rebuild on. And you ultimately want to find some that you could potentially develop somewhere down the road. They may become a dude. I think a good example of that right now is Rashid Shaheed. It's an undrafted free agent, showed up, was going to just be a return guy, but they were figuring out ways to get him the ball. And, I would say now if he's not dude status, he's dude like. He's a solid, clear number two receiver on an NFL team. And you got to look at him and go, the right team and the right scheme, is he a number one? Those are the guys that we're trying to find every year that you bring in these young players from the back end you draft, the UDFAs. They're not all going to be in that category, but you need to find some of them if you want this rebuild to work. Have you noticed the first player I have on the list is Rico Payton for a reason that you may not be really thinking of. I wasn't at first, but when I was kind of looking over the roster a while back trying to make my 91, I'm looking at Rico Payton and going, yeah, he played an awful lot on special teams. And he was healthy for the most part last year. He only missed one game, week 9 against Carolina because of a back issue, but it didn't keep him out any longer than that. 257 special team snaps, 11 combined tackles, 5 misses. That's on the downside, but I will say I'm not going to bang on him too hard for that because that was an epidemic that hit our defenders the last 2 or 3 seasons that seem to never be able to get fixed. I'm assuming the current coaching staff fix it. They don't. I'm going to get worried and get pissed, and I don't know which one of those two will be first. But so I'm not really worried about that. That really the one blemish on him. But when I started thinking back, because I kind of get used to him being a really good special team player, and he was really good for the 16 games played, covering punts, covering kicks. And you feel like he's probably pretty safe on the 53 just based on that, but you don't know that for sure. But I'm thinking back to preseason last year where he turned some heads. He made us notice him. Now I get it was preseason and primarily he was running with the backups, but he still looked better than everybody else on the field. And when he did get some snaps, it was only 21 defensive snaps on the year, so it's such a limited sample. It's, can you really pull anything from that? But he only had two passes thrown his way that he had to cover. They were both incompletions, and he got credit for a pass defending on one of them. I feel like watching him play on special teams, remembering the way he could just always be around the ball on the defensive side, and you're like, you're feeling like, or at least I am, feeling like, man, he's on the verge of being kind of that playmaking style, very aggressive, very fast. Some things Brandon Daly wants to bring in on this defense. Specifically talked about that when he drafted two guys that could put Rico Payton in a little bit of jeopardy, and Riley and Sanker, because they're both expected to play special teams. They both that fast, aggressive style that they want to see on the defensive side of the ball and on special teams. And they're expected to contribute heavily in the defensive backfield, possibly Riley being a starter, maybe even sooner than later. So what I want to keep eye on, I think everybody it's worth looking at on Rico Payton is if he can join that conversation with those two. Instead of getting 21 defensive snaps and just like, and I'm assuming I couldn't figure out last year when our cornerback started going down why he didn't get more play, unless they were just looking at him as an oh shit moment. Oh crap, everybody's hurt. We got to put Peyton out there. It felt like, especially as the season was going south late in the year, deserved a little more of a look. Hoping he gets that look. I want to see if it's really there, because the thing about Peyton, um, outside of his special teams ability and maybe, the flash I think I see that going, hey, he could be more and he could be a defensive contributor. Remember, he gets to work this year with Terry Joseph, Robert Blant, and Grady Brown. That's our defensive pass coordinator, assistant DB coach, and our cornerback coach. So you would like to think the reputation that they all roll in, if there's something there, it's going to get developed. And now you have that second year player we know is good on special teams, fix the tackle problem. And I'm right now believing they will, or the missed tackle problem, however you want to look at it. But get him ready to go. Can you join that conversation that they're already putting on Riley and Sanker? And again, they're rookies. There's no guarantee they're going to do it. But it'd be nice if you're looking at a young core, rookie, second year guy like Rico Payton, guys who are doing that kind of stuff, getting on the field. If they need a start for some reason, or if they earn the start and they're going to be the starter, all good stuff in the rebuild, especially in that secondary. Past few years, the Saints, they went through a span where they were really, really good in the secondary. We're starting to see the decline. And part of that rebuild is getting that back to where it was. Guy like Rico Payton being very good on special teams, and I hate to use this example, but I have to, is that he's not a JT Gray in the sense JT Gray is great special teamer, but I don't know if you're like me that when things get a little hairy and all of a sudden we're getting thin and we have to put him on the field to play safety. Now, I tense up and that's an oh shit moment for me. And it's like, hope we get by on that. Just because he doesn't do it very often. I'd like to see Peyton, if that happens at the corner spot, not have that reaction from me and just go, okay, we're good. He can step up and fill that. And that's the kind of thing I want to see, that if he can prove in training camp, keep an eye on, because it's better for him and it's definitely better for the team. If we can honestly say, look, he's a Jimmy Jones special team, but he can do it at cornerback also. Now I want to bring up the name Bub Means. Okay. It's a fifth round pick last year from Pittsburgh. He had the same issue that a lot of players had last year, where he started off on the injured list and he finished the season on the injured list. So he wasn't as bad as others, because when training camp opened, he was on the non-football entry list, but he didn't stay there very long. Missed a few practices. That combined with being a rookie, you know, may have slowed him down a little bit, because he kind of had three parts to his season. Um, Weeks 1 through 5, not used very much. Only got into 4 games, 3 offensive snaps. He did have some special team snaps mixed in there. 0 catches on 1 target. Then week 6 happened. Tampa Bay, we all remember we lose Olavi and Shaheed. Suddenly he's got to jump in the offense. He gets 37 snaps in one game with 5 catches on 8 targets, 45 yards, and a touchdown. Denver, as much as I'd like to forget that game ever existed, we were awful in it. So it's hard to put into context how good he was or wasn't, because I felt like nobody was really good in that game. But maybe he was a bright spot at times. He 3 catches, 5 targets for 37 yards. Week 8 against the Chargers, only gets 9 offensive snaps, 1 catch for 36 yards. No touchdowns in that game, and 1 high ankle sprain that puts him on the IR. He was designated to return, comes back into practice, re-injures it, and effectively his season ended in that San Diego game because he wasn't able to come back. He finished the season 9 catches on 15 targets for 118 and a touchdown, 0 drops, 13.1 yards. Crowded wide receiver room. I get it. Olavi and Shaheed, your top 2 guys, and you're holding your breath. You can keep them healthy and get them through the season. We'll see. You sign Brandon Cook. Uh, Hopefully it works out, but I think I'm not alone in having some doubts about what he has left. But hopefully it's there because we're going to need it to be, especially if we want to run 11 personnel at all. Or you're looking at Cedric Wilson, who was good, solid number 3, number 4 receiver in Dallas when he was there with Kellen Moore, moved on to Miami and then to us, and nowhere near what he was in Dallas several seasons ago. And they're hoping to recapture that with him. So I guess that's your top 4, but 3 and 4 maybe a little shaky. After that, you get a whole bunch of guys fighting for a job. And Means came in one of the toughest, when you talk about depth, one of the toughest positions, 5 games, only active for 4, barely played in any of them. Suddenly your top 2 receivers go down, you throw him on the field, and he's running out there making plays. And like I said, he might have been one of the brighter spots in the Denver game of that debacle, and makes one big catch in San Diego very early in the game before he gets hurt. So that shows me a lot. And I want to see that come out because, again, a second-year guy where you can go, he's going to be in our top group of receivers. And if you can recapture, it's not even 3 games. He didn't even play 3 whole games because he came in after 2 guys dropped basically in Tampa Bay game, and he didn't stick around very long in the third game that he started, or the second game he started, third game with significant snaps against the Chargers. But the fact that he could just come in cold and do what he did, I think it's impressive. Not a lot of rookies, 5th-round picks could. So he's a guy to keep an eye on in training camp because crowded room, and he's in a group that they have to distinguish themselves. And more than likely, enough if they want to get ahead of Cooks and Wilson, not even to mention Olavi and Shaheed if they stay healthy. So I think that he's a guy worth keeping an eye on. I think if he can push himself up, if he can find that Tampa Bay game and some of the other things he did good in Denver and in San Diego on a limited basis, and I keep saying San Diego, I mean Los Angeles Chargers. Hey, that's a Jimmy or Joe that you can add into the mix. And with potential, hey, how good can you get him? He didn't fold when that spotlight came on him in the Tampa Bay game, and I think that's just very, very important point to stick to, something to build on. Training camp, he's got to show up. He's got to prove to Kellen Moore and that new offensive staff, although Washington, the receivers coach, is still the same. Prove that I can stay healthy and then reproduce what ability I was showing to be that, back end, possibly more wide receiver, but make the 53 more important, be able to make the field and make plays by being active on game day. So can he reach Jimmy Joe status? I think he can based on very limited what we saw, but he's going to have to show up in training camp and prove it. Because if he doesn't, as crowded as that room is right now with people, wide receivers fighting for jobs, he, show up or show out, right? Or they may send you off. So hopefully Bub Means And if it isn't him, somebody else has got to do it. So hopefully we see that in training camp. Safety slash linebacker Isaiah Stalbird. First thing I'm gonna watch for if he actually makes it to training camp because he is in the position. Look, there's just the back end of our roster, and you would say that's where he is. That's all low hanging fruit. That if we keep bringing more people in, we'll talk a little more when we talk about the signing of Jonathan Bullard in a bit about this issue. But there's going to be some guys extremely vulnerable if we continue the signings, and he could be in that list. Not saying that he is or isn't, but you again, you look at the back end of our roster, you're going potentially. So if he shows up there, then I'll tell you the reason why I'm definitely keeping an eye on him. He had a very interesting path to the NFL. He played 2 seasons in Nebraska, and then he went to FCS school, South Dakota State, and a very good one because he helped them win 2 national championships while he was there. He was at Nebraska 2 years, and then from 2020 to 2023, he was at South Dakota State. So he's a 6-year guy. He's been around, older player, but he was a safety at first. When he transferred to South Dakota State, they moved him to linebacker, where he played as an undersized linebacker. He's rolling, and even the last I looked at the Saints roster on their website, still listing him around 6'1", 215. In his college career, 238 tackles, 18 and a half tackles for loss, 18 pass defended, 5 forced fumbles. He's a guy that kind of fit what Brandon Staley was talking about on his defenses, which is fast, athletic, aggressive type players, what they want. And his athletic profile was good. It's just his size and a little bit of his age has pushed him down to basically undrafted free agent status. And the fact that is he a safety or a linebacker? So we bring him in, and there was a lot of hype, and I don't mean hype in a bad way. A lot of people talking positively about what he could contribute if he was going to make the team, which he didn't, but he did get on the practice squad, got some call up to help us out on special teams, and eventually at the end of the year was added to the roster and finished out. Everything he played was special teams. And ultimately it was 5 games, 83 snaps total on the season. He had total tackles while playing special teams. But again, Brandon Staley is running a 3-4, but it's non-traditional. I think that's more and more of a phrase being used in these defenses where you're going to see multiple fronts, multiple things happening. You have players behind hybrid, for lack of a better word, or whatever you want to call it, where they may play with the components of an off-the-ball linebacker and a safety. Kind of what he does, right? Or what we think he could do. Think what caught him in the Saints under DA was a very traditional 4-3 look or 4-2-5. I think that was probably our preference to put that on the field. I don't know if you quite figured out how they were going to use him, where they could put him. And last year with all the turmoil going on, it just wasn't a great season to try to figure that out on the fly, I guess. I don't know, but I know Brandon Staley does do stuff like that with his reads and the way he wants to effectively show one thing, change something else, and confuse offenses. A guy in this profile, now they probably still, even if you're planning to do some type of hybrid edge, off the ball, in the box safety role, something along those lines, may need to put a little more on him weight wise, and they may be doing that. We don't know. We'll probably find out more what his weight's looking like in training camp if he gets there. But I think he's just, as a super sleeper, got to keep your eye on because Staley, I think, the way he ran his defenses with Rams and with the Chargers, used very situational guys on defense who could do multiple roles. And it sounds like, from what we heard in OTAs and in minicamp, that trend's going to continue as he schemes and builds this defense. So Stalbert, with college production at a lower level and a good athletic ability, flexibility, just kind of the way he went through his 6 year in college and the way they tried to use him last year with the Saints, because I know he worked at both spot safety and linebacker during the course of his tenure on the practice squad and in practices. maybe there is a spot in here somewhere, and he could just be a sneaky good find as every down player, but between special teams and maybe finding some of those situational roles that Brandon Staley likes to use and is looking for, he makes a 53, and we'll see what happens from there. Um, I still think it's a long shot, so this is a very big sleeper. Keep your eye on. But I think the situation this year with Brandon Staley, if he can make it through all the way through training camp, affords him an opportunity that he likely wouldn't have had if we were still running a traditional 4-3. So it didn't take long after we got the deal with Chuck done on Friday to bring in one of the free agents we had looked at, Jonathan Bullard, defensive lineman, defensive interior guy, who I when we initially had brought him in, I think it was in June, going, he makes a lot of sense. You know, again, as long as the deal's right and we don't get crazy with it, he makes an awful lot of sense bringing in some veteran help because I that is one of my groups that has the least confidence on that defensive interior because I think the play, especially stopping the run, has not been good and is steadily be getting worse season to season the last few seasons. A lot of confidence in bringing back some of the veterans we're bringing back, relying on going, I don't know. Well, this is kind of his forte is stopping the run and playing multiple defenses, multiple schemes because he has been in the league 9 years. He's going to turn 32 in October, so he is an older guy. But 3 years in Chicago to where he started, where he was drafted 2016 to 2018, all three with Brandon Staley. Then he had 3 years in a row with single seasons in Arizona, Seattle, Minnesota. Sorry, Atlanta. Then he went to Minnesota in 2022 and 2024. Brian Flores. Now, Brian Flores was defensive coordinator or is defensive coordinator each of the last two seasons. Very similar in concept to what Brandon Staley is doing with his defenses, but although if you put them next to each other, they look nothing alike. But it is a concept based in a 3-4 look, non-traditional, multiple fronts, a lot of zone behind with matchups and pass offs. Still going to run some man at times, trying to show one thing and do something else after the snap, confuse offenses, but regardless, wants fast, aggressive defenders. You know, his they I've heard it called the amoeba defense because he's so innovative and will use so many different aspects, components of all that and mix it together and is not afraid to scheme for whoever the opponent is. Also, like Brandon Staley. So you're looking at in Bullard, look, he's known as a very solid run defender. He's had some elite tackle numbers over his 9 year career. He just doesn't seem to miss them. If he can get to you and get hands on you throughout 9 years, I mean, Bullard was pulling you to the ground. God knows we need some of those on the defensive line. So, and because he's had so many stops, he's in an influence with Brandon Staley, where he started at the time. Brandon Staley was outside linebacker, the edge coach there with Chicago. So he's played multiple techniques, multiple schemes in his career. Not unlike Devin Godshaw, similar age, similar experience that we traded for from New England. So I think it's a good move. Um, and like Godshaw, I think it's going to be an upgrade, over some of the veterans we had last year or some of the younger players, you know, as a second year guy to keep your eye on. Does Christian Boyd make it to training camp? Because we don't know. Like I said with Stalbert, Boyd would be a guy that if he makes to training camp, because very similar as run defender and all his draft profile last year, you would say, hey, we'd want to keep an eye on him too. But if you're bringing in veteran free agents that are better, I don't necessarily know if he survives or anybody on that end of the roster because now that this seal is broken and the 91 was decided and the first thing we do is bring in Bullard, which means you got to make room for him and the possibility they may still be adding free agents. And it may not be right away, but it could be soon. But a Samuel Davis Collins, guys who I talked about, and then you even get into situations where There's some guys with affiliation with Brandon Staley, veterans, who fit kind of the number of years in the age group of this league in the league as Bullard and Godshaw. Someone like, you know, Kaiser White as a linebacker, played a couple of years with the Chargers with Brandon Staley, and he's been sitting out there as a free agent. There's a possibility there's more on the way. Don't know how high or low profile they may be bringing people in. But what I like, and I'm hoping that we would see some activity soon in the free agent market and bringing in some guys, because I like sending the message. Um, there's no more roster complacency. And it felt like, to me, the last couple of years, you know, there was a high percentage, probably 90 plus. We knew who our 53 man was going to be. They knew it. And not that players and coaches were doing this consciously, but they weren't quite at the level of intensity, which also leads to the accountability issues and all the other issues that we had going on, because everybody felt safe or knew they were safe, or and that's more of an organizational, the way we're handling things, to allow that condition to kind of develop and start happening. Well, you start bringing in early and making some of these movements, and especially opening up as many jobs as you can for competition going into training camp. I think you're sending a message. Look, we're no more roster complacency. We will bring players in to challenge you. You know, to make the 53 man roster, you're going to have to earn it, and to keep yourself on the 50 man roster, you're going to have to keep earning it. It's the way it used to be around here, and it needs to go back to that. Not that anybody's scared for their job, but they uncomfortable knowing I don't do it. They can bring somebody else in to replace me to be able to do it. So I think that's a good thing. I don't think you want to go overboard with it. Like I said, you don't want to be scaring the crap out of everybody, but sending that message, look, you know, accountability and is coming back, and part of that accountability is if we have to, we will replace you. Kind of recap of, and very quick, the free agency with Bullard and where we're kind of sitting with that. Obviously, I'm shooting most of this on Sunday, recording it mostly on Sunday. It's going to be coming out Monday. Very good chance we may have a little more roster movement between now and then, not least of which finding out, unfortunately, who's not on the 91 anymore, 90-man roster anymore, to make room for Bullard. In anticipation, we could see a little more of that over the next few days, even into next week, before training camp gets into full swing. I anticipate that's going to be the conversation now in training camp. What's there, how they're doing, and as I kind of covered this last year around this time, the the word I don't want to say that begins with an I, that was a huge problem for us starting in training camp. That's the part I don't want to have any discussions on. Hopefully, the new training staff and those guys, sports science people, and all, can kind of get us through most of that, where it won't be the huge issue it is. Because I want to spend training camp talking about what exciting things are going on there with the players. How's everything looking, and what's the possibility that the rebuild is headed in the right direction, and hopefully it'll get us there within the next year or two, where we'll be having different conversations around training camp. So, other thing, let me know in the comments of the second year guys. Any ones you want to look at, because I could have put, I felt like Dallin Hoker on this list, and just trying to keep it short, kind of the top three. Stalbird is the sleeper and the long shot, but he's intriguing. He made it over somebody like Hoker. Kyle Hergel, who was up and down all last year, played a lot of special teams, but did do some fill in at both left and right guard for us. The I word was happening all up and down our offensive line. I think his issue is more about the depth, but you know, maybe something to keep an eye on. Does he work his way up and take one of those last spots? There's a couple more floating around that we could have talked about. So if you got thoughts on them, up them down in the comments for me. So, and first time here, remember, please go hit that like, share, subscribe for me, because that's all the stuff that keeps the algorithm happy and healthy, and happy and healthy algorithm is a happy and healthy me. So till I see you next time, I'm Tim. Peace out and who dat.